My family owns a small vacation home in Colorado. My parents are passionate skiers, which is why they bought the place. The house has been in our family since before I was born, and after more than 40 years, it's definitely showing its age. My dad has spent years keeping it in good shape, but now it's getting to the point where he talks about tearing it down and building something new. I usually stay out of those decisions. This story takes place about 15 years ago when I was 8, and my brother Josh was 11. It happened during a heavy blizzard while we were up in Colorado for a trip. The snowfall was intense, and of course, my brother and I couldn't resist going outside to play. One of the best parts about visiting our vacation home as kids was the sheer amount of space around it. The property has a large open area surrounded by thick woods in every direction. A dead-end road runs downhill, leading to a few other large properties. It was the perfect setup for hide-and-seek, snowball fights, and all sorts of outdoor games. That day, Josh and I decided to play one of our favorite snow games, a snowball fight with our own special rules. We each had to build a fort anywhere we wanted, but we had to tell the other where we had set up. The main objective was to steal the jewel, a giant snowball, from the opponent's fort and bring it back to our own. Josh picked a spot for his fort on the property of our nearest neighbor. Since the owners were almost never there, we had played on their land many times before. He ran down the road to set up, while I waited for a signal, a whistle, to start the game. I stood there waiting and waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. By that time, I figured maybe I just hadn't heard the whistle because of the wind. So I decided to go find him. I had two options: take the road or go through the woods. Since the idea of walking through the thick snow-covered trees in a blizzard felt a little scary, I chose the road. The snow was deep and the wind blew flakes into my face, but thanks to all the layers my mom made me wear, I wasn't cold. As I got closer to the neighbor's driveway, I glanced through the bare winter trees, but didn't see Josh. Since the woods were thinner in the winter, I had a pretty clear view, but there was no sign of him. That was strange. I stepped through the trees onto the property, thinking I could sneak up and grab the jewel from his fort before he saw me. But when I got there, Josh was nowhere in sight. His fort was there, but he wasn't. Just as I was about to grab the jewel, a woman's voice called out, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I spun around toward the sound. Standing at the front door of the neighbor's house was an older woman. "We're playing a game," I called back. "Your brother isn't here," she replied. That didn't make sense. I was sure he had come this way. I took a few steps toward the house, feeling confused. As I got closer, I could see her face more clearly. Something about her seemed off. She looked older than I first thought, and she was smiling at me in a way that made my stomach twist. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Upstairs, in one of the windows, someone was watching me. At first, I thought it was Josh, but as I looked closer, I saw that the person had half their face covered by a black beanie, with the lower part of their face hidden beneath the window frame. Then I spotted another detail that sent a chill down my spine. There were fresh footprints leading to the house. They had to be Josh's. But then I saw something even stranger. His footprints didn't just lead to the house. They turned around and headed back into the woods. The woman was still smiling at me. Then she raised a hand and waved me inside. "Come in and get out of the cold," she said. Something inside me screamed no. My gut told me something was very wrong. I stood frozen for a second before I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed, "Josh!" Silence. The woman's smile instantly faded. She hadn't expected me to do that. Then I heard heavy footsteps inside the house. Someone was upstairs, moving quickly toward the stairs. I didn't wait another second. I turned and ran. As I sprinted toward the road, I heard the woman yell something, but I couldn't make out what she said. My heart pounded as I pushed through the deep snow, following my own tracks back home. Then, over the howling wind, I heard something that nearly made me collapse with relief. My dad's whistle. It was the whistle he used to call Josh and me home for dinner. I ran as fast as I could. When I reached our driveway, I saw my dad and Josh already there. My brother looked shaken. Before I could even speak, he blurted out, "There were people in the neighbor's house. They told me to come inside." My breath caught in my throat. "The same thing happened to me?" I said. Without hesitating, my dad grabbed a weapon, something he kept for protection, and told us to stay inside with our mom. Then, he marched down toward the neighbor's house. We waited anxiously. It felt like forever before he finally came back. His face was tense. He told us that when he knocked on the front door, no one answered. The house was silent, but the back door? It was unlocked. He went to a different neighbor's house, who happened to know the owners of that property. They made a phone call, and what they said next still sends chills down my spine. The owners were not there that weekend. No one was supposed to be in that house. The police were called immediately. When they searched the house, they didn't find anyone. No sign of the woman, no trace of the person in the upstairs window. It was as if they had vanished. After that, my parents made sure to bring home any valuables whenever we left, in case someone tried to break in. But after that day, Josh and I never played near that house again. Just thinking about it still creeps me out, and to this day, I thank God we didn't step inside. I've been skiing for as long as I can remember. My parents were competitive skiers, that's actually how they met, so they made sure my siblings and I learned the sport as early as possible. Fast forward about 20 years, and I was now 21. A senior in college. This story takes place a few winters ago during a ski trip with my friends, Jaden, Ryland, and Amir. We were in Vermont, home to some of the best skiing in the Northeast. I can't remember exactly which mountain we were on. Jaden booked the trip, and Ryland drove. But it was massive, with at least 7 ski lifts covering different peaks. If I had to guess, I'd say it was Killington. We skied for nearly 2 full days, and I'm sure there were still trails we didn't even touch. By the second day, we already had a feel for the mountain, so this time we focused on pushing our limits. The double black diamond slopes never got boring, and racing each other down the mountain became its own little game. With about an hour left before the lifts closed, we stood at the top of one of the peaks, catching our breath and deciding how to end our trip. That's when 2 girls approached us. They weren't wearing helmets, which was unusual, and they were stunning. One brunette, one blonde. And I don't mean this in a weird way. They were just objectively some of the most beautiful women I had ever seen in person. It was almost disarming. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devin and made small talk. They said they were bored because most of the skiers on the mountain were older, which actually made sense. We had noticed that the day before, too. That's probably why they approached us, a group of guys closer to their age. Devin seemed like a serious skier. She kept asking Amir all sorts of technical questions about his ski equipment. He and Ryland had their own expensive skis, unlike Jaden and me, who always rented. The girls seemed impressed by that. Taylor made a comment about the fireball shooters we had been drinking, and we joked that alcohol unlocked our true ski potential. They laughed. Then Devin pulled out a small, unmarked bottle. She teased us, calling Fireball weak, and saying we should try something stronger. None of us were about to back down from a challenge. So we passed the bottle around, each taking a swig. I noticed Ryland was already a little too tipsy, which wasn't surprising. He always drank more than he could handle. So I made a mental note not to drink too much myself. Something about the situation just felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was weird for two random girls to be this interested in us. I mean, we were all wearing helmets. They couldn't even see our faces. But Amir was being his usual flirtatious self, and Taylor seemed into it. It seemed like we were just going to spend the last hour of skiing with these girls, which honestly didn't seem like a bad way to end the trip. Then, out of nowhere, Devin asked if we had ever skied a trail called Devil's Forest. I had never heard of it. Neither had Jaden or Amir. Normally, our friend Chase was the one who memorized every single trail map. He was basically a human GPS. But he wasn't with us on this trip. The girls explained that Devil's Forest was a glade trail. For those who don't know, glades are trails that run through the trees, so you're skiing in a forest. We loved skiing glades more than anything else, so this mysterious trail immediately caught our interest. We told them we were in. They led us to a narrow trail entrance and told us to take off our skis because we had to walk uphill for a bit. That struck me as odd. In all my years of skiing, I had never had to walk uphill to reach a trail. Jaden and I exchanged uneasy glances. "I don't like this," he muttered under his breath. We considered backing out, but at the end of the day, we were still 4 guys. What could 2 girls possibly do to us? So we followed them into the woods. Something wasn't right. The terrain finally leveled out, and we caught up to the others. Ryland had his arm around Devin, and they were laughing together. Everything seemed fine, until Devin pulled out the bottle again. "Before we go down, we have to finish this," she said with a grin. Ryland and Amir took huge swigs, but when the bottle got to Jaden, he shook his head. "I'm good. I've had enough," he said. For a split second, Devin's face changed. Her playful smile turned into a sharp, angry scowl. But it was so fast that by the time I blinked, she was smiling again. I must have been the only one who noticed. My friends didn't react. She put on a sweet voice and batted her eyes. "Come on, just a little." Jaden reluctantly grabbed the bottle just to shut her up. When it was my turn, I faked taking a sip. Everything in me was screaming that something was wrong. Then, I realized I had never seen either of these girls drink. Not once. I checked my phone. 30 minutes until the lifts closed. I came up with an excuse, saying we wouldn't have enough time to get back up and down the mountain before the lifts shut down. The girls insisted we had plenty of time. Then, without warning, they took off, skiing down the slope. Amir and Ryland immediately followed. Jaden and I hesitated, but knew we had no choice. We clipped on our skis and chased after them. The trail was steep. Trees blurred past as we dodged branches and skied through thick powder. When we finally reached the bottom, I felt relieved. Until I looked around. There was no ski lift. We were still deep in the forest. Jaden was the first to speak. "Where's the lift?" The girls just smiled. "Relax, it's close." Then Ryland suddenly collapsed. I stared in shock. He was completely unconscious, lying in the snow. The girls laughed. "Lightweight," Taylor giggled. Then Amir slumped over too. Panic hit me like a truck. I rushed to them, shaking them awake, but they didn't move. Jaden took a step toward the girls. "What the hell did you give us?" He didn't get an answer. Instead, he dropped to the snow. I was the only one left standing. My head started spinning. I felt dizzy, weak. The girls just stared at me, waiting. I refused to pass out. I sat down, forcing myself to stay conscious. Taylor turned to Devin and muttered, "He must not have drank enough." Devin cursed. "We have to go." I watched as they stole my friend's skis and disappeared into the woods. That's when I saw it. A van parked in a clearing ahead. The side door slid open. 4 men stepped out. One of them pointed directly at me. I realized I had made a mistake. A huge mistake. And if I didn't do something fast, none of us were making it off that mountain. This might sound a little strange, but bear with me. Every winter, my friends, Kyle, Ricky, and I, have a tradition. We walk out onto a frozen lake a few towns over. There's no big reason for it. We just like the stillness, the quiet, and the way the world seems to pause when you're standing on the ice. It feels almost otherworldly. If you've ever been alone in nature with nothing but the sound of snowflakes falling, you know what I mean? It's peaceful, like you have a little piece of the world all to yourself. Plus, the photos always turn out great, which is a bonus for guys like us who love an edgy aesthetic. This happened 4 months ago, during the past winter. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but don't worry, none of us fell through the ice. That's not what this story is about. It was snowing heavily that night, which made the lake even more tempting. The temperatures had stayed below freezing for weeks, so we were confident the ice was thick enough to walk on. Personally, I'd take winter over summer any day. Everything about it, the way the snow reflects moonlight, how it never gets completely dark, the surreal atmosphere, is just better. That night, the moon was full, amplifying that eerie winter glow. Kyle was driving. He had a pickup truck that handled well in the snow, so we let him take the wheel. Normally, Ricky was the one driving us around, but tonight, we switched things up. The lake is surrounded by a thin cluster of trees, not exactly a forest, but enough to block any direct paths for vehicles. So we parked in a nearby lot and walked the rest of the way. It was freezing, but we were bundled up. Ricky and Kyle lit cigarettes as we crunched through the snow. It must have been after midnight, though I can't say for sure. What I do remember is that we were completely alone. No cars, no people, not even the sound of animals in the woods. Just silence. We reached the lake, and as expected, it looked completely frozen over. Laughing about something upperbeard, Kyle grabbed a small boulder and chucked it onto the ice to test it. It didn't even crack. That was our green light. We stepped onto the lake and walked about 100 feet out, the snow crunching softly beneath our boots. That's when something caught our attention. On the far side of the lake, something moved. It was a dark, hunched figure near the tree line. At first, it was hard to make out through the falling snow, but it was definitely big and slowly creeping toward the ice. We stopped talking. We just froze and stared. Then, Ricky whispered, "Is that a bear?" My heart was already racing. If it was a bear, the last thing we wanted to do was draw attention to ourselves, but something about it felt off. The way it moved, it wasn't quite right. Too upright, too human. And it was dragging something behind it. A sinking feeling settled in my chest. We kept watching as it got closer. Then it straightened up completely. And we realized the truth all at once. It wasn't a bear. It was a person wearing a bear suit. Kyle muttered, "What the hell?" I was thinking the same thing. I know it might not sound terrifying at first, but if you had been there, you'd understand. The eerie glow of the moon, the dead silence, the figure dragging something across the snow. It was unnerving in a way I can't fully describe. My mouth went dry. I wanted to say something, but no words came out. The figure kept moving closer to the ice. It was dragging a bag. At first, we couldn't tell what it was. The snow made everything blurry. But as the person stepped forward, the details became clearer. It was a small black bag, not big enough for a person, but big enough to hold something important. I should have turned and walked away. Every instinct told me to leave. But I was frozen in place. Then things got even stranger. The person in the bear suit unzipped it and stepped out. Now, you'd think that seeing his face would make things less creepy, but it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. He wasn't particularly large or threatening, but there was something deeply unsettling about him. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he wasn't worried about being seen. Then he picked up a rock and started slamming it into the ice. A sharp crack echoed across the frozen lake. Even from where we stood, I swear I could feel the vibrations through the ice beneath our feet. He was trying to break through, trying to get rid of whatever was in that bag. Ricky tapped my shoulder. I turned to see him and Kyle silently backing away. Without a word, I followed. We moved quickly but carefully, trying not to make too much noise. Every step felt deafening in the silence. I knew there was no way he could hear us from so far away, but my nerves were on edge. Then, from behind us, a voice yelled out, "Hey!" I didn't look back. I just ran. Panic surged through me like ice water. My only thought was, what if he has a gun? The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted toward the trees. My boots slipped on the snow, and my legs felt heavy. I could hear Kyle and Ricky running beside me, their breathing ragged. I don't know if the man followed us. I don't think he did. But at that moment, we were in full-blown panic mode. We reached the edge of the lake, gasping for air. After a brief pause, we made our way back to the car without a word. Kyle jumped into the driver's seat and sped off immediately. The entire ride home, we argued about what we had just seen. Kyle insisted it was just some weirdo dumping trash. I told him that was ridiculous. Who the hell wears a bear suit to throw away garbage? Ricky was convinced it was someone dumping a body. But I argued that the bag was too small for that. We went back and forth, but none of us had a solid answer. The missing child. I wouldn't have thought much more about it. Until yesterday. I was at my mom's house while she was watching TV. An old missing persons report came on the screen. It was for a child who had disappeared from our area. The timeline of his disappearance matched up almost exactly with the night we saw that man on the lake. I don't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I can't stop wondering, what if it wasn't? By the time you're hearing this, we've probably already reported our sighting to the police, and if they ever find out what was in that bag, I'm not sure I want to know.